Everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear me well. I'd like to quickly introduce this conference. So this is part of the Global Entrepreneurship Week hosted by the American Center in Moscow. So we have today with us an expert in the field. His name is Igor. He hosts also the Business Book Club. So he has a lot of experience when it comes to business knowledge and information on different companies. And Igor will introduce us to the topic of Silicon Valley, which we all know what Silicon Valley is, but today we're going to dig a little bit deeper to really understand the ins and outs, some companies that became very successful, why Silicon Valley emerged as the tech hub, the global tech hub. And I hope we have a fantastic conference. So thank you everyone for joining us. I can see Igor has joined us as well. Hi, Igor.
Hi, Alfonso. Hi, everyone. Very lovely to be here. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about something which is a topic that probably everyone has heard something about, right? Silicon Valley, the place, the golden place of money. But it really is an interesting subject. How an area which was historically not known to be, of any prominence, suddenly became such a rich land, And this is a history of makers, of people actually stepping out of the comfort zone and building some amazing companies and creating some amazing things that really changed the world history and us. So I'm going to quickly introduce the history of Silicon Valley for those of you who have potentially never heard about it. In case you guys would like to learn more about the history of business or specific businesses, please feel free to join the weekly Business Book Club. And also at the end, we'll have time for questions and we'll be happy to answer those. So yeah, we should probably get going. Now, what do you guys think of? Which companies do you think of when you hear the word Silicon Valley? Please text us in a YouTube channel. Most likely there is at least some companies that come to mind, right? So actually, I've been to Silicon Valley myself. I lived there for a short period of time, and it was an amazing experience, right? It really feels like a special area where everyone is just very like-minded in a good way. And although it's not a very large stretch of land, I mean, it really is filled with just companies and talent and ideas and people that build the companies of the future. So it's located in North California, and funny thing, you can see within Silicon Valley. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I think there was some noise in the background. You can see in the Silicon Valley, there is a lot of companies located there, right? So among them, you can spot Tesla, you can spot Facebook, you can spot Oracle, Nvidia, basically the top companies that are currently on the top of the charts of the biggest companies in the world, right? But it didn't always go this way, right? So previously it was actually very different, right? Now what you can notice is that Silicon Valley today has actually become kind of the Florence of today's age, right? So Florence was the place where all of the best talent came to, right, during the golden age of the Renaissance, right? And Silicon Valley has become the same thing. And the reason why it's such a big hub, I would argue, is not because of some historic predeterminants. It wasn't preset in any way. It was something that actually just happened due to a number of accidents and happy accidents actually. And one of those happy accidents was actually the gold rush. So funny thing, Silicon Valley was actually founded by
just a moment, maybe Igor.
Sure, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, if you can maybe for the audience that don't know what the gold rush is, if you can just share a bit more of the background here, because I'm very interested in knowing a little bit about the history of Silicon Valley.
Sure. So as I was saying, so Silicon Valley was just, at the time it wasn't called that, right? It was just discovered. That area was discovered by the Spaniards at the time. we had that area was actually part of Mexico, right? And once it was discovered, and the population until the 1846 was very, very tiny, just 200 people, and most of them were Indians as well, so the natives. But then we had a massive boom of population, of enterprise, of everything happening in this area. And the reason being was that there was a gold rush. There was a massive influx of people because somebody heard, and everyone heard, that there was people that were actually found gold in the rivers in this area, right? Now the thing is that was that true? Was that not true? It was true. People did find gold there, but the first couple of people, right? Well, couple of hundreds of people, but not the whole influx of people. So the actual person that made the most money from this time was a gentleman by the name of Stamford, right? Now, many of you might say, "Oh, Stanford! I've heard of Stanford. Stanford is a university." You'll be right, because Stanford is the university that was founded by Mr. Leland Stanford. Now, he got rich during that time. How did he get rich? How do you guys think he got rich? Text, please. Do you think that he founded all of the gold? No, he actually was selling the shovels to dig the gold. So that's where this very famous, very silicon phrase comes from. In the time of a gold rush, sell the shovels, right? So Mr. Leyland was selling shovels, and then after that, he invested his capital very, very wisely. You might have heard of Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the US and the world, actually. So he was a director of Wells Fargo and one of the major investors, Union Pacific, and many other companies that were very big at the time, and of course, Stanford University. Now, this man has founded something without which I would argue, and I think that I'm not alone, Silicon Valley would never exist, which is a Stanford University, right? I mean, it would
Okay.
be...
Can you...
Yeah. Sure.
Sorry, you said a lot of things very, very interesting, all of it. So do I understand correctly that the gold rush was one of the main factors, affecting this situation, because it was a critical point in time, but I understand there were also other factors that played into the equation in making really Silicon Valley what it is today, right? So I understand it was the gold rush, and then Stanford University also played a very critical role. Could you let us know a little bit how Stanford University played a role in this whole development?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for the question. So why has it played a critical role? So I was just gonna come to it in a few slides. The reason why is because Stanford attracted the best talent. People coming there to study engineering, studying computer science. Well, at the time was something else, of course, right? And studying all those novel sciences and actually making discoveries. And then those people will stick around, working for the companies in the area, or working for the government, which was actually one of the main developers of the early technology, right? Which really had started the area, right? So that was very important. And what I would say that the main thing about Silicon Valley's importance of Stanford University for Silicon Valley is that it never tried to change it or prohibit it. It just enabled it, right? So the people that were teaching at Stanford University, they were telling the students to go and join those companies, or found companies, or try to take the ideas to the capital market, to the enterprise market. So for example, Hewlett Packard, HP, the very famous company, was founded by the students at Stanford University, and those students were advised by the famous lecturer. So, and as you can see, right, it took many iterations, right? So first we just had the vacuum tubes, which was an early technology that I was talking about that led to the development of the radios, the TVs, everything, right? Then we had the test equipment, the microwaves, their integrated circuit. It really was taking steps by steps in waves. And what's really significant here is that all of those technologies, which had impacted the whole world, had some development, some innovation that was actually made in a small area on the east coast of the US, right? And I mean, this slide here, I guess, further way down the earlier part of the 20th century, maybe you guys don't know those names like Mr. Forrest, but I'm guessing most people have heard of the guys on the right hand side. The Sergey and Larry Page, Mr. Gates, Steve Jobs, and the others, right? Those are the significant founders. And what is so significant about this slide, right, is that we tend to see that it was the individuals that drove this society and this culture. It wasn't so much, many people. It was this, and just the power of individuals that stood away from the norms and stood away from the comfort zone and made this amazing projects happen, right? So yeah, one of the key people, for example, that actually made this happen, right, was Mr. Thurman, who was, some call him the father of Silicon Valley, right? Afonso, have you ever heard of this man, Mr. Thurman? I'm guessing not. So Mr. Thurman was actually a person that attracted all of the biggest companies to Stanford, right? So, for example, Kodak, GE, General Electric, Lockheed Martin. When he set up a Stanford Research Park, in essence, what it was is that they just rented their actual park facilities, Stanford facilities, to companies joining in and trying to sell through them, right? So that really had created such a great opportunity for companies to start there and actually hire people out of university. And what I was just talking earlier about this man here, he was one of the people that actually was an early investor, early angel investor, so to speak, of the Hewlett Packard, which went on to become one of the biggest companies in the world and one of the most significant ones. Of course, there was an inflow of all the biggest giants of the tech, from the East Coast to the West Coast. So, for example, IBM set up a very big facility at the time. I mean, now it looks tiny compared to the size that IBM has and the other companies have, but at the time it was quite historic at San Jose. But of course, it was actually the entrepreneurs. So HP being they call them the actual founders as well. I mean, there's quite a few founders of Silicon Valley, but HP was really the first company that was founded in a classical way of the Silicon Valley, the first unicorn, so to speak, i.e. a company that reached $1 billion evaluation that was a startup at one point, right? So it was founded out of a garage by the two students from Stanford, and they went on to completely change and revolutionize the industry of computing, which at the time was very modest. I mean, when you think about computing industry today, you think about every industry, right? It's everywhere. But at the time, it was really, really small. And though, it wasn't very accessible, the machines were, the sizes of rooms. And the two gentlemen here, they really made it, they made a way of making that much more accessible with development of semiconductors, right? Now, what happened with semiconductors as well, which was very important, and it brings the gentleman here, was a very important company for the development was actually Intel. So Intel was a company founded in Silicon Valley as well by a bunch of gentlemen who actually left in disgust another company which was run by an older gentleman, and they were called the Despicable Eight because they all decided to quit on the same day, and they went on to find some of them went on to have found Intel actually. And Intel today, as we know, it is one of the largest companies in the world, had actually changed the way that computing was working because they made those semiconductors which were able to basically make a computer go from a size of a room to a size of an iPhone today, right? Which is a significant improvement. and in this time period, we had a lot of companies, coming up, the likes of Apple, made by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Funny thing, at the exact same time, we had another company being started in the south part of the US, and later shifting to Seattle, by the name of Microsoft. So it wasn't started in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley always was competing with other areas, but it was definitely had its own champions. For example, the two Steves right here. And they had revolutionized the industry. And again, they set up the precedent that the founders have to be young, them both being very, very young when they were founding it. Afonso, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, Igor. I can hear you.
Yeah. Have you heard of the two founders here on the screen?
Of course, I've heard about them. Yes, and I was going to ask you, Igor, out of all these companies you've mentioned, which one would you say has had the biggest impact on the way we live today, right? Because we're talking about historic events that still today are, part of our daily life. Which company would you think, or are you most excited about that? Really changed the way we maybe communicate or interact, etc. Out of all these companies you've mentioned.
Wow, I mean, it's a very difficult question, because the problem is that a lot of those companies, they develop product not in a vacuum, but they develop it, and then the other companies actually build on top of whatever they develop. So it comes in waves, right? So for example, Intel developing their semiconductors, right? Obviously that has propelled and enabled the other industries being developed around it, right? So many of them, for example, Apple, the happy Steve standing here. And then at the same time, there is actually this one of the reasons why Silicon Valley has been so successful is because people share technologies. For example, when people, and not just technologies, talent as well. So for example, when people work in a Silicon Valley company, they say that they don't work at Facebook or YouTube. They say that I work at Silicon Valley because one day you work at YouTube, another day you work at Facebook. You shift around, and they're much more lenient than, let's say, in New York, in the investment banks, in terms of leaving one company to join another. So it is really hard to answer that question. But if I had to give my humble opinion of which company had the highest significance, it would have to be Intel, which is a company that right now is being exceeded by Nvidia, right? Which is another US company, another chip maker, which is an interesting story, So like you never are on top for too long in Silicon Valley. There is always somebody that comes along who used to be small, and then they become huge, and then it comes in waves. But actually that's probably the company that has led to the most change and actually the most enablement in this industry. Yeah, to answer your question, Alfonso. Right. So after the Steves, there was the most exciting and era of the Silicon Valley, which many people think it was actually the start, which wasn't the start, right? Was the internet era, right? So the internet was invented in the 80s, but it started to grow at an unprecedented rate in the 90s. As the founder of Amazon famously said, Jeff Bezos, when he was setting up Amazon, he was looking at the speed of development of internet, and he was seeing that it was developing by 200, 300, 1,000% a year. And he was thinking that nothing can be developing that much for that long that isn't going to, change the world. So he wanted to definitely, begin developing in that area. And the same was happening for the guys, sitting in the Silicon Valley. And it was an exciting time, The one company I would like to mention is Napster. And the person sitting there on the throne.
Okay, for someone who hasn't heard about this company, can you tell us a little bit more about it, Igor?
Sure, Alfonso. So Napster is what we have to thank for the internet and the free use of internet nowadays. Because what actually happened was that, you know, the early internet was, well, I mean, it was developed by people working for the army, right? And it wasn't really something that was, you know, commercially available to people, to normal folks. And Napster was the first real browser, right? So the first company that could really enable the common folk to actually search and the web, right? Now, the thing is that a very interesting thing at the time was that all of the browsers at the time were actually paid, right? So now today when you think of browsers like you know, Google Chrome or Opera or Mozilla or I don't know, Brave or whatever it is that you use as your browser, you never have to pay for them, right? And you don't assume, and I assume that most of us haven't paid for them ever. I never paid for an internet browser, but in the 90s you did. And actually, there was one other gentleman who is not a resident of Silicon Valley by the name of Bill Gates, who actually changed this industry, and he did something which is called kill the industry by supplying the product for free, which he did. And the Napster had to change around that time. But it was one of those early, really exciting companies built on during the .com bubble, the early stages there. And the people in charge of it, so the people actually who were working at Napster at the time, included Horowitz and Andreessen. And you guys might have heard the names the other way around, Andreessen and Horowitz, one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, and one of the biggest venture capitalists in the world, and one of the most successful ones as well. Yeah. So exciting. Yeah. What about those two folks, Afonso or anyone in the comments? Have you guys heard of them before?
Definitely,
No?
definitely. What about the audience? I'm sure you heard about them, or Yahoo at least, of course.
Yahoo, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about it, Igor? Why did you put this out on the presentation?
So again, this was thank you for the question. This was the company that was very exciting in the 90s, and it is really a kind of a decade-defining company as well, alongside Napster. So a company founded by Jerry Yang and David Filo. It quickly grew to a massive size, right? Because you had this amazing thing called the internet, but what do you do with it? You know, you're supposed to search for information through it, but it's just so vast and difficult to find anything. So those guys just founded an indexation system for the internet, right? Which was called Yahoo, right? Now, of course, many of us might still have Yahoo email or might go into Yahoo to search for something, once in a while. But it has actually been kind of dethroned by Google, which was a company founded slightly later. Have you guys heard of this two folks here? No? What about yourself, Afonso?
Yes, of course, Igor. Definitely, and I know that Yahoo and Google later was actually Yahoo was actually bought by Google. Am I wrong?
You are wrong. It was never bought by Google, but maybe where you're getting this from was that Yahoo was intended to acquire Google, right? And actually, Google was ready to be sold to Yahoo because they made a superior search, right? But Yahoo declined the offer. They declined the initial offer. They declined $1 billion offer that Google made to be purchased, and then obviously that was a wrong decision, as it seems, because Google grew to be one of the world's largest companies in the world, right? And of course, you could never tell. So it was founded by two people, the two PhD students from Stanford University, Sergey Brin, actually a Russian expat in the US, and Larry Page, his fellow mate and a guy who was sharing a room with him in Stanford, right? What followed shortly after was the dot-com bubble, right? So I guess people at the time thought that all this excitement about the internet was just a buzz, and the internet was not going to even be a thing in a couple of years' time. They thought that, okay, well, yeah, there was just the normal hype, even though that word didn't exist at the time, and then it was going to go crushing down, right? Yeah. Have you ever heard about that, folks? The dot-com bubble?
Yeah, I think we've all heard about it, but why do you think that happened, Igor? In your experience, why did you think there was, first of all, a bubble? Was it just people were so excited about technology that they were losing, the sight of what those companies really were valued at, or what was it just that all those companies were actually really bringing some added value, but maybe it was overvalued to what the market usually was meant to be, or and why did the bubble burst, right? What do you think? What was the reason for that? And I think what was interesting about this time is it was a time where the real companies that really brought an innovative technology, that those actually survived and became the leaders in the market, whilst every other company that rised in that time, a lot of them actually didn't really survive. So that really shows that certain companies were there for the long term. I know Amazon, for example, was one of them.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And it was very interesting to see, actually. And now, if you guys ever have time, I recommend a special video by Mr. Jeff Bezos actually sharing his thoughts on the dot-com bubble, and his thoughts it was made at the time, and his thoughts on the difference between the dot-com bubble and the gold rush. So they have a lot of similarities. Both were based on a high influx of people going to the Bay Area, right, which is very interesting. Both times you had a lot of people not really bringing much value, right? So later on in dot-com bubble, you had the pets.com kind of companies, which were companies that were really not generating enough traffic, enough money, enough anything to be able to sustain their their value. And at some point during the dot-com rush, people stopped paying attention to the money side of things. They just cared about the amount of clicks or amount of hits that websites got. And what's interesting about that is that there were some companies that were generally good, and once the dot-com bubble burst, those companies survived, right? One company you mentioned, which is Amazon, is a great example. And Mr. Bezos, actually in this specific talk I'm talking about, he was talking about how he sees that they're improving in every scenario, like in every possible thing they're improving on. So they're improving on the amount of sales, they're improving on the amount of traffic, they're improving on the amount of MRR, but at the same time, the stock is going down just because of the industry. But there were some companies which were generally not great, and the fact that they burst was an understanding situation. And then Pets.com is one of the infamous companies that was just valued at such a high price, and really there was not much behind the curtain. So yeah.
Okay, good, interesting. I know Jeff Bezos sent I think a message to their shareholders explaining how the value of the company was, it was going down, but whilst everything else, all the metrics, the sales, the traffic, the customers, the efficiency, how they were able to scale, everything was really increasing. So that there you can see really that a mismatch in the value of the company, and of course, long term, and the market is more efficient and rewards the companies that really have a good value to provide to the industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I see here you have the image of the founders of PayPal, which.
Yeah, some of those are not founders, some of those are employees, right? But yeah, you're correct. Yeah. So the reason why we have this image here is that the PayPal has the people that work for PayPal have actually led the actual rise of the Silicon Valley post dot-com bubble, and well, some of them during as well. Obviously, PayPal rising in its value significantly during the dot-com bubble, and was one of those companies that actually benefited it significantly because of dot-com bubble. It was a very interesting company, which was founded by as a merger from a number of from two separate companies. One founded by Peter Thiel, and the other one by another famous billionaire in today's day and age. And they managed to find this company which actually led the expansion of e-commerce, because at the time people weren't really paying for things online, and it was difficult for them to actually get attraction at first. And they were the first ones that introduced free money concept in that, you know, people would register an account at PayPal, and you know, from if whoever was to refer them in there would get money for it. Obviously, this is crazy. You're just giving people money away to register accounts, but because money was so cheap due to the fact that it was a bubble, right? They were able to do it, and they knew it was a bubble, and they knew they were giving money away, but they understood that as soon as they reach a certain volume of people using the app, using the system, it would make sense, because once everyone is using PayPal, you would have it for yourself, right? And what's really interesting is that those people, they went on to find so many great companies. LinkedIn by Mr. Hoffman, finding things like Yelp, things like YouTube, Everbright, so many others that have really defined the industry. Tesla, SpaceX, Palantir, you name it, right? Now, what's really interesting is that following those years and actual eventual, yeah, you know this person here. Can you recognize him?
Yes, of course. I think most of the people in the audience can recognize him. But this is really a topic that is, I guess, very interesting for people now listening into your great presentation. Right, this social media is something that is in our daily lives, right? We always use. That's the way we communicate to people all around the world. So tell us a little bit more how it all started. Was it with this young gentleman?
Yeah, well, so this young gentleman makes envious us all, I guess. He was just 19.
That's true.
When he founded one of the most valuable companies in the world, called Meta nowadays. At the time, it was called Facebook, and it was actually his second company. And it's a very fine story of Mr. Zuckerberg, because he didn't stick around in Harvard. He decided to pack his things during the summer and move to Silicon Valley, and he stayed there ever since. And I think that's a great story, and of course, it was told in a much more vivid and better way, by Mr. Sorkin in the film The Network, The Social Network, which is a great film, and a lot of it is true. So Musk and the other co-founders, they did move to Silicon Valley and founded this company which was growing at an unprecedented rate. And what was really interesting, actually, about Facebook specifically, and again relates to Russia, actually, in a sense, is that it was the first precedent when the Silicon Valley company was so big and so clearly going to be successful, right? But they didn't want to make an IPO just yet, because they knew they could grow it and make an IPO at a much better evaluation later on, right? They founded an investor that could give them so much money, it was equivalent to the amount they would raise with an IPO, right? And that gentleman was actually a Russian gentleman, Mr. Milner, and he was the person that they got onto the to raise that biggest round at the time. And then years later, of course, Facebook did an IPO successfully. by the time they did their IPO, they were already, a profitable business generating money with advertisement and the rest of it. And at the time, of course, they had to find a way towards that, right? And then there was the rise of those kind of, social companies. So I don't know how many of us can recognize the gentlemen here. They're a little bit less known. And the gentleman without the beard is less recognizable than he usually is. This is the founders of Twitter, right? And they were also founded in the Silicon Valley. Those two gentlemen here, speaking to an interviewer, are the founders of YouTube, right? Which was bought for $1 billion by Google at the time. And everyone thought that was a crazy amount of money for such a young company. And obviously in time, it looks like a great acquisition for how much YouTube is generating today. What do you think, Alfonso? What was your best choice of an acquisition in Silicon Valley? Do you think this one was the best one?
I think it was a fantastic one, and I think because of these people, we are here together today. Today having this conference with people all around the world, because these people had an idea and they built it. And Igor, just to take a step back, so you mentioned a lot of companies, a lot of different founders. So what kind of times are we looking at now? Is it the 2000s, right? The dot-com bubble.
Yep.
Had it already happened, or
yeah? So
of
course, this is 2006. So it's actually the like I was saying, it was the rebound from the dot-com bubble, and we saw that the Silicon Valley took time to recover from the dot-com bubble, right? It was really a bad time, and people to this day they remember it, thinking like, oh my God, that was horrible. But by this time it really, people understood that those companies, they can generate money, and it was clear that it wasn't just a bubble. It wasn't just all hoax. Like those companies generally had a profit potential, especially with Google becoming so profitable with fantastic advertisement, and Facebook following suit in a couple of years. And what really had, again, changed the focus of the whole industry was the development of advancement of personal computing in our own pocket, which was the founding of iPhone. Now, was the iPhone really the first company that did a smartphone? No, it wasn't. Was it the first company that did a smartphone that didn't have almost any buttons except two? Oh, well, actually three, right? The two sound buttons. Sorry, 4 buttons. No, it wasn't. But it was one that did it in such a great way and with such a severe focus on the internet and the 3G that it had really significantly helped companies expand their products, their software, their applications into the mobile sphere. And we had the rise of those mobile applications, mobile-enabled applications, including the YouTube, which is we mentioned, including Twitter, including for example, Facebook. And what has really been significant after that, so there was the decade of marketplaces, right? So the one company that was founded, which is kind of like a household name for a marketplace startup, would be Airbnb, right? So funny story, Airbnb was one of those companies which was sponsored by Y Combinator, an incubator from Silicon Valley. And at the time when it was founded by this gentleman over here, right, it was actually very unsuccessful at first because nobody believed it would be possible that a company a Silicon Valley company can force people to let strangers come into their apartments, right? Because why would strangers let other people come to stay at the house? Isn't that dangerous, especially in the current world? But Brian Chesky and his co-founders, they really believed in the idea, And at the time when they were raising around, basically a recession happened, right? The 2008 banking crisis, and what that led towards was that the Silicon Valley had to, the whole world had to start saving money, but people still had to travel, and then people wanted to get some additional income streams, right? So side hustles, and one of those would be to rent out their apartments towards people, and it really had grown towards actually having a great product, and especially during the 2008 presidential election, with Barack Obama traveling to all the small states and all the small cities, towns which didn't really have great hospitality facilities. People were not able to stay there at all unless they were staying in somebody else's home, right? Okay, so
And so sorry to cut you off, Igor. For people who might not know what Y Combinator is, can you quickly explain just for the audience?
Okay, yeah. So of course, yeah. So the Y Combinator is the incubator from Silicon Valley, which was started in really the late noughties, right? By a person that was actually a founder himself, and he was a founder, in the early age of the internet, Paul Graham and a few others, right? And they actually gave money away at the very, very early stages of the companies, when basically companies sometimes would just have an idea and a prototype. And so, for example, Airbnb was not a fully developed app at the time when DoorDash were applying for Y Combinator. They had one internet page and no software written at all. The likes of Stripe, it was an application that had one customer at the time when they got into Y Combinator. So they were really giving money away to those fantastic companies, or sometimes not so fantastic companies, at the very early stages. And then a lot of those companies did the typical Silicon Valley thing, which is that they pivoted until they found a niche, the product market fit, so to speak, or they just realized that there wasn't a niche and they closed down. So, for example, a platform that we guys might know of, which is Twitch nowadays, and is owned by Amazon, at the time was actually a very different kind of company. So it was founded by four gentlemen, and the four gentlemen that founded Twitch, they had a genius idea. And what do you guys think was the idea? Was it to find a network where gamers can share the content and connect online? No, that was not the case. They founded a company that was just basically connected a camera to a guy's head by the name of Justin Kan, and they set up a company called Justin TV, where they just recorded everything that Justin did for 24 hours straight. Now, today it sounds like a very easy thing to do, and also not so not so innovational. But at the time, it was something unprecedented. Nobody has ever done that. Nobody has ever recorded a person, the full time of whatever they were doing. But very quickly they realized that Justin's life was not very interesting, and even though they had all this money from Y Combinator, and they realized that they needed to switch to to pivot towards something else, which was that they had unprecedented video facilitation facilities. So they switched towards that, and they actually went into the gaming industry, right?
Okay.
So that's one of the examples. Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. So
very well.
yeah, just coming towards the last couple of slides before the Q&A. As you can see here, we have some of the companies that Y Combinator was able to invest into. You probably recognize a lot of them, like Dropbox, Stripe, or Monzo, Reddit, and others. So yeah, they were very good at doing that. And the reason why and how they do it, and how most of the venture capitalists do it in Silicon Valley, is that they invest at scale, in many shots. And then if one company makes it, if one company becomes successful, that company will pay for all of the other shots. And that's really the only way to do it, because you might have the right founders, in the sense that you have the right people that are great, and they would come on to find companies and later on that are great. You might have an idea which is novel and it's interesting and it could be great, but it's just not the right time for the product market fit. So for those situations specifically, and for all the other situations, you have to have a situation where you are able to lose money on certain companies, but win big on others. And of course, coming towards the end, we have the gentleman here, which is who? Does anyone know? Everyone, please comment if you know who this person is. I was very curious. So this person is actually the founder of OpenAI, and is probably the hottest and it is the most valuable startup in the world in the moment, alongside ByteDance, a company behind TikTok. And this person is Sam Altman. And Sam Altman is one of those classical entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley that founded his first company when he was in his 20s, sold it successfully, then went on to work at Y Combinator, and he was heading Y Combinator until he actually went on to work for OpenAI. Great. Now,
interesting. I wasn't aware of it. Okay, and of course, OpenAI developed ChatGPT, which a lot of people use nowadays. I think AI has become part of our lives. So this is the new trend in tech is how do you integrate artificial intelligence with pretty much every single thing you can imagine. So exciting developments ahead.
Exactly.
Okay, Igor, can you tell us a little bit more about what Silicon Valley is? Silicon Valley's.
Yeah. So I mean, is it really just gonna be in one place forever, in a place on the on the west coast of the US, or is it gonna come to different places? It's a question that people ask. Depending on whether they want to invest into the housing or into their career and actually try to move to Silicon Valley. Now, it's a good question, because at the moment we have a number of places, even within the US, that are up and coming, and people are saying that they might take over. So there is something called Silicon Hill, which is located in Austin, Texas. And a lot of companies are moving towards there. Famously Tesla, for example, and a number of others. Dell historically was located in Texas, because the founder, Michael Dell, is from Texas himself. And many other companies are moving towards that. Actually, Apple is opening an office there. Google is. So all the big names, all the usual suspects. Then you have Seattle, which used to be just a small town, in middle of nowhere, so to speak of. And nowadays, I mean, it is the city where you have two of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon and also Microsoft, right? And also actually, well, I mean, less to the Silicon side of things, but definitely a company that helps the culture of Silicon Valley. Starbucks as well is based in Seattle, right? And then you have the international ports, which people would argue that would be the next Silicon Valleys. London, Singapore, and maybe Bangalore in India. But I would think, in my humble opinion, that the Silicon Valley is going to be still located somewhere within the US, and most probably within Silicon Valley itself, right? So as you can see here, coming towards the end, the Silicon Valley has always developed amazing companies throughout its time, and and those companies would go on to be having an amazing evaluation at all times. So I think we're coming towards the end of their presentation, so we can come to the Q&A section. So yeah, Alfonso, what do you think?
Well, first of all, Igor, thank you for giving us all your knowledge. I think it was very interesting. I learned many new things. So I'm sure everyone has found it very interesting. So some people have been asking some questions, so I'll read them out as well. And I personally had a question also. Why do you think that the US will still be the main hub for technology? And why do you think the US will still keep that prominence, even with new locations coming up like India, we know, but why do you think the US will still remain the main hub for tech companies to succeed? And then I'll go into the questions.
Sure. So I think that's a very, very good question. And if I knew the answer precisely to that reason, I would have many more ones and zeros to my name. But I think in my humble opinion, as a person who's a founder and who actually, lived in a bunch of places in, different, jurisdictions in different places in terms of different levels of friendliness towards founders. I would argue that Silicon Valley is just unprecedented. The level of the things that come together in Silicon Valley came together in one place naturally, not unnaturally, but naturally, right? So you had originally, the hub being developed because of, an unprecedented spending by the government onto, different technologies, and then startups being built around those, right? You had you had and you have the amazing universities that supply talent from all around the world. You have the amazing access to capital, which is the most important thing, or one of the most important things, right? The Silicon Valley is not so it's not so innovative just because of the actual technologies being developed there. It's so innovative because of the finance systems that it actually has, with the venture capitalists investing into companies at such an early stages of the development in hopes of one company paying for all of the other failures that they are expecting to have, right? So that's, I think, is an amazing way that is built. And I think that it's just difficult to match that. When you go to Silicon Valley, it's it really, of course, not every part of Silicon Valley, but most of the parts. Whenever you speak to a person, you can hardly get a conversation which is besides the technology, right? So I think that's a really, really cool thing that it would be very difficult to emulate, and many have tried, and many have succeeded in to an extent, but to the same extent we will have to see. But I would really think that it would take time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree. All right, two more questions. Maybe one, we're running a bit of out of time. So, one is about the government. How did the government really play a role in helping Silicon Valley get started, or was it more businesses themselves, and the government didn't really play a role in this development? What do you think?
Well, it's one of those tricky ones, right? So the government definitely played a very key role, right? But it wasn't just the government, right? So that's an interesting one, because when you think of Silicon Valley, you think of like free market, you think of all those entrepreneurs going out there and disposing the capital they got from the venture capitalists, and generating new technologies, and disrupting the noble way of life. And you don't think of the government, you don't think of the defense companies and anything like that. But that's how it started. It was at the time, US was trying to be very competitive in its space industry, and it was developing all those technologies, and it needed to basically get the best tech possible, which wasn't developed at the time. So that's what was actually the original development behind it. But later on, and what really had propelled Silicon Valley and hasn't propelled other state-funded programs in other parts of the world, was that those people that worked for the state and were developing those technologies, they used that, and the state was open about kind of not closing down on this technology, and those people continue to develop amazing tech just around it, right? And of course, the companies we talk about today, the Hewlett Packard, we talked about today about Intel, we talked about Lockheed Martin. all those companies, staying in that area and developing some unprecedented technologies. Yeah, so it's a bit of a mixture, to answer the question. Yeah.
Sure, but I think it's clear. Great. And one more question to close a bit of the conversation, looking a little bit more into the future, because these are topics that many people are concerned about. And someone in the audience is asking, should Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley companies be solving wider problems, for example, climate change, instead of only focusing on apps, let's say, fintech apps or
that's a very good
communication
question.
apps, but actually solving more global issues?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Alfonso. And whoever asked that question. So it reminds me of a very famous phrase that the founder of Apple, Mr. Steve Jobs, said to a man who was working for Coca-Cola at the time. He came to him and said, this was when Steve Jobs was coming back to his position as a CEO of Apple, when he was previously kicked out by the board, and he was coming back to Apple the second time around when Apple was in a very dire situation and actually was saved by its rival Microsoft by a big loan. And at the time when Steve was kind of in a dire position, he had to recruit the best people to get himself out and his company out of it. He founded this man and he said, come to work at Apple. And the guy says, no, I can't. I have this great position at Coca-Cola. He said, do you want to sell sugar drinks for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world? And those kind of phrases really makes people want to join the companies and want to actually come along and create great products. Another thing that really reminds me of this is some founders actually talking about the importance of their application. So people recruit people away from Facebook or Google and say, like, do you really want your mind to be working on developing the better buttons and the better ways to share social media, or do you want to actually work on something that can save the planet and change the world? I think that it is a very interesting topic, because we seem to have had a big sway of companies in the early 2010s for solar, right? And we had some successes, for example, SolarCity, but we also had quite a few unsuccessful companies in this area, and they were basically, they had to go, and that's okay. So to answer the question, I think Silicon Valley will solve a lot of issues, and that one in particular, but hopefully it will happen before it's too late. Great.
I think that's a great way to close the presentation. I'd like also to thank everyone who's watching live. Please remember that you also have this, this live will also be on American Center of Moscow's YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, because there was a lot of information, very interesting information that was said in here. So again, I thank you all for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again. And Igor, thank you again for such a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please come along to the Business Book Club, where we will continue to discuss business-related topics every week on Tuesday. See you all.